Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree, and I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
You're talking about the Roger Patterson film of 1967. Documentaries talk about that film all the time, but they terribly misstate the evidence as it happened. They were down there for nearly 3 weeks, as it's been told, and they hadn't found any prints. And one morning, Bob and Roger went up into Bluff Creek where they'd been before. They've been all over the place. They had to say, where are we going to go today? They decided to go up into Bluff Creek, and that's when they rounded that bend up in Bluff Creek on the sandbar. There was a downfall tree. The tree had a root system that was standing there, probably 8, 9 feet high, as Bob describes it. Roger was just ahead of him on his horse. Bob's pulling a pack horse, and he's on his horse, but he's got a much bigger horse. Roger rode a little horse I always tease and say is the size of a Great Dane. Roger was a little guy. So anyway, Roger rounds the bend, and when he does, his horse goes crazy. And Roger notices off by the creek, there's a creature squatted there, covered with hair. He pulls his horse down, tries to control it. He gets off of it, gets his foot hung up in the stirrup, frees himself, and he had his camera in the saddlebag in case they saw tracks. He grabs the camera out, it's one of those old hand-wound cameras, and he takes off running for it and tells Bob to cover him. The creature by then, when Bob come around and had seen it, when all this is going on with Roger's horse, it was standing. What had happened, Roger Patterson had an interest in the Sasquatch for about 7 years or so or more. He'd been out looking for evidence, looking for tracks, gathering reports. And then in the summer of 1967, on Onion Mountain, there were some tracks that had been found. They were building roads at that time up through, making a highway north, up through Bluff Creek and on in up the west coast. So John Green went down to see these tracks. John Green's a local man, lived here. And when he got there, the tracks had pretty much been backbladed and there was only a few left. Well, by the next morning, when John got up very early in the morning, the phone rang. And John says, obviously on a radio phone, the guy called and says, what you're looking for is here. That's all he said. John got a hold of the Sun newspaper in Vancouver. They put up $500 to get pay for a plane and a pilot to fly him down. John got a hold of Dale Moffat, and he brought a tracking dog named White Lady. They all loaded on this small Cessna, and a guy by the name of Keith Shazari was the pilot. Keith, I spoke to about a year ago, and after all these years, you should have heard him. He says that it was amazing the way the dog, they put him on the scent of the track where you'll see him just before dark. He said, Bill, he says the hair literally stood up on its back. That dog went into high alert. There was something about those tracks it did not like. There was over 1,000 tracks had been reported there. They counted, I think, 560, 70 tracks that were still left. Other people had been there to see them. Some had run over them, had stepped on them. But these tracks went on for over a mile or so. It went off the road into the bush, up and down a few inclines, through bushwhacking, back out onto the road again. And there were actually 2 sets of tracks that I've seen in the pictures, 15 and 13 inch. They didn't know if they were together, but they did cross paths a few times going back and forth. And then at some point, John Green, who knew Roger Patterson, a lot of the guys knew each other in this little circle. He called Roger Patterson's house when he was in town, and he told him, he left a message with Mrs. Patterson, Patricia, that when you let Roger know there are tracks down here, because at that time Roger's away over at Mount St. Helens with Bob Gimlin on an expedition. There's tracks down here. We know he's wanting to shoot a little amateur documentary of him with a Sasquatch hunter. He was hoping to see some tracks to film. Tell him good tracks, pristine, nice looking tracks. Come on down. It took about 2 or 3 weeks before Gimlin got around to actually being able to leave. Him and Roger took off for Bluff Creek. By the time they got down there, Bob's told me that when we got down there, you could see where the tracks had been, a lot of them, but he says because of the rains and they were in dust and dirt, loose dirt, it kind of washed them out and took a lot of the definition out. You could tell they were footprints, but they weren't really the nice pristine tracks like John Green had described. A few years ago, we always got people claiming to be involved in this film as a hoax. And it's so disappointing that the news media is willing to welcome somebody claiming a hoax without investigation, without question. And this is what happened when Ray Wallace died. Ray Wallace had a construction company down in Bluff Creek many years ago, and then by the time the Patterson film was shot, he'd moved his operation back to Washington. But yet, every time footprints show up, they wanted to blame, oh, Ray had a pair of wooden carvings here. So you got Dan Rather with CBS, you got Fox News, you got MSNBC going on. The mystery of Bigfoot has been solved. It was Ray Wallace, according to the Ray Wallace family. Oh, wow. So let's take a look at that. They didn't. So what I did is I got Ray Wallace's carving, and I took, despite the fact that many of these were different lengths in the carving, different widths in the carving, I made them all the same length, I made them all the same width, and I can tell you, a 5-year-old, a beginner, if you'd have just made the comparison, you could see that this wood carving in its toe line could not have made that. But yet, these news channels, Ray never tried to fool anybody, yet skeptics, when you see the tracks along the road, they left this flat appearance, flat, flat, flat. Well, where's the recesses? This is in fine dust and dirt. It left flat tracks. Where Green and everybody stepped with their logging boots, their regular shoes, their tennis shoes, you can see the imprint of every sole pattern. This here would have left like a sponge print in that fine dirt. It would not have left a flat, which a pad does when you step all that weight down on it. It would not have been flat. And all of a sudden now they got to think, oh gosh, we were so certain that Ray Wallace made these. The transfer of evidence from this pattern on the bottom of this foot, which they call a stomper, could not have made this track. A biomechanical foot, and there's anthropology studies in scientific journals that talk about this. When the foot is in motion, it flexes. There are things that take place, and these toes, for instance, when you go to bend your foot, a Sasquatch has what we call a mid-tarsal break. Ankles back here, and right in front of it is actually where it bends its foot. You can see it in the film, you see it in the footprints. The ball of the foot was deeper, and then of course the toes are always deeper because by then all of the weight of the animal has come forward. This part's lifted off the ground, and you got everything, and your toes work like hydraulics. You got muscles and tendons pressing down, and now you've got 800,000 pounds instead of being scattered over the whole foot. You got it on the front of the foot, then you got it on the toes last, and they sink in the deepest of the whole track. Here's a picture of 2005 where me and the watchman at 20 Mile Bay made it up to the top of a mountain that had a growed over switchback on it. And I walked over, and this track was there. Again, the big heel, didn't even press here, the ball, and the bulbous toes. It even reached a certain depth of dampness because this had water in it, and the air dries it out, but farther down you deep, you get into the moisture. This is my footprint. After I'd filmed it, I'm a pretty big guy, I took my foot for scale and put it right alongside of it. I have pointed heels, people do. Our heels are much narrower than the big rounded heel of a Sasquatch. Many years later, I'm talking to John Green, and he allows me to see some of his pictures from Blue Creek Mountain taken in the summer of 1967. This is the tracks, the 15 and 13-inch track where they crossed each other's paths at one point, and by golly, the heel stepped, the foot cupped, looked like it rolled over onto the ball and the toes imprinted into the ground right here. And that is exactly what happened in 2005, because I was always bothered why it didn't press the middle. I've seen the mid-tarsal breaks, like you see in the Patterson film, where the foot bends and the large part of the ball of the foot back towards the heel pushes this dirt back, and you get this mound, this ridge across the track back by the heel. So that's another sign of a real working. And these are the beginning, these are the Chrome images, they call them. They're the best images of the film itself. Here you can see the toes on the bottom of the animal. It's in motion. This foot's a little blurred. And here's at the end of the stride, this is one of the things I always point out to people. Notice how the foot is vertical to the ground. Look down here, the foot is hardly off the ground, it's already vertical to the ground. When people walk, and I explain this to folks that come out, even the skeptics, I tell them, listen, when people walk, their feet barely come 15 degrees off the ground. It's like a pendulum. They don't lift their feet vertical, high and vertical. I said, if you want to try doing it, it's hard enough to stand that way. But if you try walking that way, and as far as I know, no one has ever been able to duplicate that. Our bone structure just does not allow it. So in the film, if you do stabilization of the creature, you can see it had finger movement, it had wrist movement. It bent at the elbows. You put a man in a suit, because the arms are so long, people say, well, maybe he was using sticks to, I think Hieronymus, as somebody suggested this, Bob Hieronymus, was the last guy to claim to be in a suit. Possibly he used some sort of sticks or apparatus, even though Hieronymus, in his story, which I don't believe a word of, he said he slipped his hands in the gloves. But the problem is he's 5'10" or so, he's under 6 feet. And when we bend, then our arms have to bend at their elbow. Our wrists have to bend here. In order to get as wide as the back was, like Grover Krantz said once, you'd have to hold your arms up to the side of the elbows to get the shoulder width. Then you got this, so then you got to use some apparatus to swing the arms. But these bend, because you can see in the film, in the original film, people saw it, you could see the muscle movement. It's one thing to try to make a fake suit look like it's got muscles, or even make a muscle look like it moves. But these muscles in the film work off of each other. They fire in a certain sequence when we all walk, or we bend our elbows. When we move, everything works in a certain sequence off the other. To make something mechanical that could do all that and mimic perfectly nature, it's ridiculous. And it wasn't really available at the time. But then, furthermore, a few years ago, National Geographic, for the first time in history, they did a study where they used science. They used photogrammetry and optic measuring. That's where you can take mathematics, you take the lens size that Patterson used, you can take known measurements that were taken on the film site, you can take a film frame, and you can tell distances to everything, the size of everything. This animal in its stooped walking posture from the ground, top of its head, leaning forward, deep knee bends, 7 feet 6 inches high. That put all the 6 foot high guys out of the running as far as I'm concerned. That means standing erect. If it would stand straight up, you could figure at least another 6 inches, put up around 8 feet. They went on to say that only 1 out of 100 million human beings reach the height of 8 feet tall. And those that do have noted abnormalities in their walking gait. This creature walked like it was in its birthday suit. When Roger got behind it and it was walking away up the valley, you could see the space between its legs.
This creature was, had shoulders that were a good 36 inches apart. And the pelvis was as well.
When I wrote my article, Who's Hoaxing Who in the Making of Bigfoot, I showed a guy in an attack dog suit all padded up. He waddled like a penguin because your legs are so bulked, they rub together. You don't have that freedom of motion when you walk. This creature did. 8 feet tall. When you get up over 8 feet tall, you're getting up around the Guinness World Book of Records. And you're talking about people who need apparatuses just to hold themselves and steady as they walk because their muscles are so taxed, their joints, they're usually lock-kneed, the knees are turned in, they have a hard time motoring along. This thing walked away like it was pedaling a bicycle. People look at that film and go, yeah, it walks like a man. But the Russian scientists that looked at it and biomechanics experts in the early 70s when Dahinden took it to Russia, When they watched the film, these are the guys that had the Russian Olympic, they were training Russian Olympians. They realized that this thing walks like somebody who cross-country skis. They said, no one walks like that, and they were absolutely